Introverts aren't like everyone else, and that's not a bad thing. It just means what might be fun or enjoyable for some can be downright irritating for us. This isn't a personal preference or a whim, it's psychology. Introverts are wired differently and are sensitive to things that others might not even notice. I've compiled a list of 10 things that, according to psychology, only introverts find irritating. Let's get started. 1. Overstimulation. Introverts are sensitive souls, and I mean this in the most literal sense. According to psychology, we introverts tend to be more susceptible to overstimulation. This means loud noises, bright lights, and even large crowds can quickly become overwhelming for us. Imagine you're at a party, surrounded by a sea of people making small talk, music blaring in the background, lights flashing all around. Sounds fun to some, right? But for an introvert, it can be exhausting. This isn't because we're antisocial or grumpy, it's simply how our brains are wired. We tend to be more sensitive to sensory inputs and need quiet and solitude to recharge. 2. Unsolicited advice. We introverts are often in our own heads, thinking and processing. And because of this, we sometimes come across as aloof or detached. But let me tell you from my own experience, this isn't an invitation for unsolicited advice. I remember once when I was at a social gathering, keeping to myself and enjoying the ambience. An extroverted friend of mine walked over and started giving me tips on how to be more sociable. Smile more, he said. Mingle. Don't be so quiet. Now, he meant well, but his unsolicited advice felt like an intrusion into my personal space. It was as if he was implying that there was something wrong with me being an introvert, which there isn't. 3. Small talk. Introverts and small talk don't mix well. Here's why. According to psychology, introverts prefer deep, meaningful conversations over shallow chit-chat. It's not that we despise talking. We just prefer having conversations that go beyond the surface level. We want to know what makes you tick, your hopes, dreams, fears, and passions. So while extroverts may thrive on discussing the weather or the latest celebrity gossip, introverts find these topics draining. It's not because we're snobbish or aloof. It's just that we thrive on depth and authenticity in our conversations. Remember this next time you're chatting with an introvert. Skip the small talk and dive into something deeper. You might be surprised by how much more engaging the conversation becomes. 4. Being put on the spot. Introverts, generally, are thinkers. We like to take our time to process information and form our thoughts before we speak. So, when we're suddenly put on the spot, it can feel like a deer caught in headlights situation for us. That instant need to respond or perform can be incredibly nerve-wracking. Whether it's being asked to share our thoughts in a meeting without any prior notice, or being called upon to give a spontaneous speech at a social gathering, these situations can be deeply uncomfortable for us introverts. It's not about shyness or lack of confidence. It's about having the time and space to formulate our thoughts and responses. So, if you're dealing with an introvert, give them some heads up or time to prepare. It can make all the difference. 5. Interruptions. Introverts, by nature, are good listeners. We prefer to sit back, observe and absorb what's being said. But there's one thing that can really grind our gears: interruptions. Imagine you've spent a good amount of time carefully crafting your thoughts, waiting for the right moment to share them. Just as you start speaking, someone jumps in and cuts you off. Frustrating, isn't it? For introverts, this can be incredibly irritating. It's not just about the rudeness of being interrupted, but also about the energy and effort we've put into forming those thoughts and ideas in the first place. 6. Misunderstandings about introversion. As introverts, we often find ourselves misunderstood. People tend to label us as shy, antisocial, or even rude. And while these labels can hurt, what's more irritating is the lack of understanding behind them. Introversion isn't about being antisocial or aloof. It's about how we gain and lose energy. Unlike extroverts who gain energy from social interactions, we introverts recharge through solitude. We cherish our alone time. It allows us to reflect, create, and simply be with our thoughts. So when people misinterpret our need for quiet as disinterest or rudeness, it can feel deeply disheartening. We're not trying to push anyone away. We're just different in our needs and preferences. Understanding and respecting these differences can go a long way in building stronger relationships with the introverts in your life. 7. Lack of personal space. One thing I've always held dear is my personal space. It's more than just physical boundaries, it's about mental and emotional space too. I remember once when I shared a flat with a very extroverted roommate. She was always friendly and outgoing, but she had a habit of bursting into my room without knocking, eager for conversation. As much as I appreciated her enthusiasm, her invasions into my personal space felt like an intrusion. I felt on edge, never knowing when my solitude would be interrupted. For introverts, having our personal space is crucial. It's where we retreat to recharge, reflect, and relax. When that space is constantly breached, it can be incredibly irritating and draining. 8. Forced socialization. You might think that the best way to help an introvert come out of their shell is by pushing them into social situations. But here's a twist. That's often the last thing we want. Forcing us into socialization doesn't make us more outgoing. Instead, it can make us retreat further into our shells. We might even start to dread social engagements, knowing that we're expected to act against our nature. Instead of pushing introverts into uncomfortable social situations, consider inviting them to participate in ways that respect their introverted nature. You'll find that we can be just as engaging and fun, just in our own way. 9. Noise pollution. While some people can tune out background noise easily, for introverts, it's a different story. The constant hum of traffic, loud music, or even people talking loudly near us can be incredibly distracting and irritating. Introverts tend to be sensitive to their environments, and excessive noise can quickly become overwhelming. It's not just about being annoyed. It can actually drain our energy, leaving us feeling exhausted and frazzled. If you see an introvert reaching for their headphones or seeking out a quiet corner, they're not being antisocial. They're just trying to create a little peace in a noisy world. 10. Being labeled as shy. Introversion is not synonymous with shyness. This is a crucial distinction that needs to be understood. Shyness is about fear of social judgment, while introversion is about how we respond to stimulation, including social stimulation. Labeling an introvert as shy can be misleading and downright irritating. We're not scared of social interaction. We simply prefer quality over quantity. We thrive in one-on-one conversations and meaningful connections, not large social gatherings.